To respect everyone's time, this is the adult education panel. If you're here for the youth outreach panel, that will be upstairs in room 320, but you're definitely in the right place. We're going to have three presentations today. First is Celia Pierce and Lizzie talking about teaching video game design and feminism through LARPing. And then Magdalene Lowe, who's going to be talking about edu-larping for career design. And finally, Susan Weiner, talking about case studies as tabletop RPGs. And I see that all of our presenters are here. So we're going to begin. The way we're going to structure this is that each presenter or presentation group has 15 minutes. We're going to listen to all three of them, and then we'll have them all come down and we'll invite questions and commentary and discussion. That sounds good for everybody. We'll get started. So our first presenters are Celia Pierce and Lizzie.
Ooh, equal first level. Yeah.
So I'm Lizzie.
I'm Celia. Hi.
Celia is a professor, and I'm a layperson. Yeah. I'll go with it.
LARP queen. That's usually what I call her, but yeah. So we want to talk a little bit about using what that is called hashtag feminism or credited in our Foundations of Game Design class, which is the very first class that our undergraduate students get in game design.
We used hashtag feminism to teach about game design, but also to teach about feminism.
Consider kind of game design is the Trojan horse for feminism.
Yes, yes, and we think these work really well together.
So, embodied game design is actually a form of video game instruction that's becoming increasingly common from board game modding, for instance, which is a very common classroom exercise. Why we like to do embodied game design, and the pictures you see are board game modding, and the bottom is people playing new games from the 70s with a parachute. Why these are really good is because, first of all, they level out the playing field and privilege design over coding, so that means having technical expertise doesn't put you at an advantage. They also engage both multimodal and situated learning, so you're learning within your body.
Why LARP? Why not? Using LARP to teach game design, there are just a lot of advantages of it. LARP has a kind of narrative aspect to it, and the ability to create a narrative is decoupled from the having the skill set of coding. If you are going to make a LARP script, you really have to learn how to write procedurally. People are potential facilitators are notoriously easily confused. Using LARP in a classroom also helps your students get all of the benefits of being in a LARP community, developing emotional intelligence, reflection, critical thinking, and so on. Short form LARPs are great for classroom use because they are about as long as a class session, or ideally a little shorter.
So, there's a bunch of reasons why we like using hashtag feminism LARPs in the classroom, and this was originally introduced by my colleague Alessandra Pinoza, who moved back to Denmark. But I basically picked it up from dealing with Lizzie, and Lizzie also started with him. So there's a number of reasons this is a good resource for this. One is that they sort of upend the traditional hierarchies of the classroom. Once you start doing a LARP with your students, and this was talked about a little bit in the prior session, but it inherently questions the format and the sort of hierarchy of the classroom. It's somewhat revolutionary or whatever you call it. The hashtag feminism LARPs are inherently short. They don't require a lot of preparation, overhead props, and other kinds of things that are typical of longer form LARPs. They engender empathy through role playing. They prompt discussions on sometimes challenging topics. It's much easier for me to have a hashtag feminism game than have to have a conversation about that because they kind of warm up the crowd with that. And also, they really do a fantastic job of showing how values are embedded in systems, which is something we really want our students to understand about games.
So we've tried a few different hashtag feminism LARPs. And the first one we'll talk about the format first. So in the first session, you give people a short introduction to LARPs. Just a quick lecture, which is great because it exposes the students to LARP. Then we play a #feminism game with a little bit of debriefing. And then they make their own #feminism game over the course of several iterations.
Yeah, so this is a four class session module that this is how I've developed it further. The first, and we're going to do a little bit with these case studies and sort of tell you what succeeded and failed. So,
yeah. So Glitzy Nails is a LARP by Kat Jones. It is about class relationships inside a nail salon. Half the participants play customers, half the participants play nail technicians, and the nail technicians actually give a manicure during the LARP. And then there are two mechanics. So there is a monetary tip jar. So when the nail technician does something that the customer likes, she can put money into the tip jar. When the nail technician does something that the customer does not like, she can take money out of the tip jar. Then in addition, there is a jar that represents the emotional labor that the nail technician is doing. So if the customer does something that makes the nail technician's job easier, she can put tokens into the emotional labor jar and vice versa. We didn't have any shots from Celia's class. These are shots from a run of this game in Spain.
So, this is kind of the rationale and talk a little bit about what happened. First of all, we wanted to get students out of their comfort zone. However, this class had 10% female or non-male gender binary students. That was actually turned out to be an epic fail. We wanted to create a sense of empowerment among minority, female, trans, and non-binary students. That was also an epic fail.
Most of them opted out.
Yeah. Actually, all of them. So I picked the game specifically sort of with them in mind, and they hated it more than anyone else. So that was a good intentions gone horribly awry decision on my part. Reconfiguring the room also upset the power structure of the classroom. In this case, it didn't work very well because it was too much physical labor to reconfigure the room to be a nail salon.
We learned some stuff. We think that it was not the right game to choose for this class because the male students had no exposure to manicures. And so the actual physical labor of playing the game was difficult for them. And it made it hard for them to immerse and really get into the scenario. They also had trouble playing women. In fact, we had one male player who refused to play a female character at all, so we invented a role for him as the owner of the nail salon. And some of the concepts might have been too complex for this audience. So this group of students was not ready to have a discussion about intersectionality or emotional labor. These were like higher order feminist concepts, and we needed to establish some grounding probably for that.
So we sort of came away with this idea that curating a web for the audience is super, super, super important. We thought Lizzie Nails would work really well, and Lizzie's also run it at other contexts like social psychology classes.
Not me, but Kat has run it, and it's worked great in other contexts. Like in a social psychology class, you might have more context for the way the game addresses intersectionality. Or in a gender studies class, again, you might be up on the concept of emotional labor and intersectionality, and it would be more of a concept. And I do believe that it has also been taken to a devised theater class in Ireland, and I got good flavor reports.
So the second game that we decided to try was Shout Down to Launch. Morningstar. One thing I want to say about both of these games is they're actually both based on real research, which is kind of cool. There is an actual sort of social scientific research stack of it. So, Shout Down to Launch. So do you want to talk about the game?
Shout Down to Launch is about a group of two sets of rocket engineers. They are trying to fix a problem in the dwindling time before launch. It will not go well for them. So the class is divided into two groups, Group A and Group B. There are some subtle social engineering suggestions to persuade people who are cloud and tall to volunteer to be in Group B. And what is not revealed is that Group B is the group that everyone else will talk over and interrupt during the course of the
They
game.
signify that by wearing hats.
Yes. And then there are some rocket diagrams handed out. The rocket diagrams have different parts labeled. If you're in Group A, you get access to one of the diagrams or the other diagram. If you're in Group B, you get access to both of the diagrams. And then there's a beautiful, beautiful jargon sheet that gives you plenty of suggestions on how to condescend to each other. There is a 20-minute clock, yes. 20-minute clock set, and that's how long the game lasts.
So there were a couple of things that we rationale were really well. The social dynamic of technobabble, elitism, and also gendered interruption are all things that everyone in the class experienced. The gender balance was a little more women in the class percentage-wise, which helped, but everyone had had that experience. We've reconfigured and upended the classroom power structures, but in this case it really worked. And I think one of the biggest reasons this game was effective was because it was funny.
Yeah, this game worked better for this audience. It was better calibrated to the audience. It was a little, it was dealing with something that was, the concept was simpler and easier to grasp for these particular undergraduates. It also could be used to teach game design because there is a really interesting use of lack of transparency. And for first-time role players, it's easier often to go big, and this game really encouraged that. But the social mix of players did make a difference. Celia and I had two different groups. She asked people to volunteer to be in her group and took them to the other room, and so we think maybe she might have taken most of the extroverts away to the other room. And I had a group of introverts, and I really had to push them to interrupt each other. And so they got the message of the game that their play experience was a different play experience from Celia's group, who were very, I looked in there and they were gesticulating wildly and drawing on the bulletin board.
Yeah, they had appropriated the blackboard originally. One thing I did do that was really helpful was I role-played the boss of the rocket launch thing, and every once in a while throw the door open and yell at them and tell them to get their overpaid butts in gear and get this problem solved or whatever. That also helped to kind of amplify it. The humor definitely worked. They were laughing a lot, which was great. And so here's some, and then we also have these what we call collateral benefits.
Yeah, increased group cohesion functioned as a team building exercise. Celia made a very interesting comment that women in the room who had previously been quiet spoke up more, permanently.
Yeah.
And that the vocabulary about gendered interruption influenced the rest of your class.
Yeah, the
basically.
social dynamics changed radically after they took this game. And it also gave me some scaffolding to highlight this problem, because this happens a lot in my classroom, especially when we have more male students, so I was able to use that as a marker, as a way to talk about it.
Hashtag feminism can work great in the classroom. Short and easy, low overhead to run. It's easy for newcomers. It has these game design benefits of foregrounding the way you do procedural narratives and the way you articulate rules. It introduces soft skills like empathy and listening and being sensitive to other people's boundaries. It lets you explicitly discuss feminist issues, and it demonstrates that you can embed values in game design systems, or not just that you can.
But the most important thing we found was that audience targeted curation really made a huge difference. The effectiveness of the game is very much relying on the demographic mix. Also, this game was played, Shoutdown was in smaller groups. I think that was a big factor. The game can provide a lot of scaffolding for discussions later, so how it fits in with the rest of the curriculum is really important. And also, it succeeds in some way irrespective of the gameplay outcome. So there were certain things that happened as a result of Lizzie nails that were also positive, even though the game experience was not so great.
And the students were, in fact, able to go on and write their own hashtag feminism games after.
So,
So we could see use of hashtag feminism games in the classroom in several other, there are several other applications. You could use it in a feminism or gender studies class, inclusiveness training. How many people are tired of being interrupted? It introduces social concepts like emotional labor. You can work with stereotypes. There are games in the collection that touch on all of these other things.
Thank you so much.
First of all, let me say I'm really, really glad to be here. I'm from Magdalene here, and I have a really different background from, I guess, most of you here. I do the boring stuff, the corporate zombie thing. Okay, don't let my boss see that. Yeah, but this LARP thing has been something that I've been doing since I was a teenager. We had it quite differently in Singapore. We don't have a name for it actually. It's just a game, right? Role playing, and there's some of us who do this stuff. And I got back into this by accident almost. I took 1 year out of my corporate job to do an education startup. And this was the time in Singapore where career design is huge. So I think you would have heard about it around the world. A lot of jobs are getting displaced. We have people, and I'll just click very quickly to the next slide. We have people who really, really need help in the job scope. Right? So this is a really real need here. And then the question is, how do we use all of that, all the knowledge we have in experiential learning, game design, and so on, to meet some of those needs. And I said, this came out by accident because it was something that was supposed to be a one-off. We got commissioned, the startup that I was doing, got commissioned to run a game. And after discussion, this is the game I'm going to share. It's being picked up by the government now, and we are in advanced talks to run like 40 sets of it. So we're really very exciting. And the way that this game has been designed really is combining, what's necessary in the career design space. So we take what the government has developed, what the career development people have come up with, and then we match it with the pedagogy. How do we want to share the information as well as the game design mechanics. So it's really about combining research from all these different areas. In a while, I'll show you how it's actual game development techniques that we are showcasing and gamifying. So just by way of example, this man you see here is an actual sales agency leader. Right? He does insurance sales, he's top in his field, and we got him to design the sales component of this game. Right? And then some of you might recognize this gentleman here, Mads from the Danish Edu-Larp school. So that's where some of the mechanics come in. Okay, so about this game, this is the stuff that I'll be sharing. This is what the participants see at the beginning. Right? So all the usual principles of LARPing apply. There's a whole game world, the participants go in, and they get to create their own card. Right? So earlier on you saw that there's this element of multiple intelligence. So we say that's one of the things that you should consider while choosing a career. So well, here you are, you've got my smarts because we don't want to overwhelm people with technical language. So you have things like, are you picture smart, are you self-smart, so intrapersonal smart, right, in multiple intelligence world. Are you logic smart, are you word smart? You fill in the blanks yourself. We have some rules around how many boxes you can tick, but you can tick it across any of these 8 categories. And then there's this other component, which is your educational sort of the progress you are making in the room that they are in. So imagine this as a room. We'll flash a test on the room. So you start with this first one. This is what students in Singapore take when you are 12 years old. It's a compulsory national exam. So every participant literally has a sheet of paper in front of you. We give you a little mock test. In this case, you'll be memorize 20 words. Right? And we flash that for a minute or two, and then we take that off the screen. You fill in the blanks on your worksheet, and depending on how much you get wrong, you either get retained or you get promoted. Typically, we'll just fail 2 people just for the fun of it. And then everyone else goes to the next level. That's actually the only compulsory thing you have to do in this game. Everything else is sort of like sandbox mode, right? You just go out, discover the world, no front loading. So you have this, and then there's this other element. Again, backed by research, we say that there is, besides what smart you are, your character, who you are also plays a very important part in eventual career success. So this part would be facilitators in the game. If I spot you doing something that shows grit, I will check your box. Right? So I don't tell you any of this at the start of the game. And it's only at the end when we debrief that people go, aha, that's something I should be looking out for in my actual life as well. And so that's what you have. Get some of the game mechanics, the way we play, 3.5 hours, 6 rounds. And then you have the training 5 minutes, which is in-game mode, and 5 minutes, which is sort of out of game, where we do a debrief, because we don't want to get to the end of the 3.5 hours and find that people have totally missed the point. Right? So the 5 minutes there is really to help them to get back into the game if they're not catching it for whatever reason. It's also a mechanic for us as the game masters to steer the game. So just by way of example, we had a particular game where when the students were just not going to the coding station, right? The software development part of the world. So what we did was we wanted to direct more students there. We said, well, who's earning the most money? And turn out we want the software developers. The next round of the game, everybody before some of them found out that money or no money, they were really not cut out for this stuff. Right? So it's a very natural distribution. And I think at the end of it, it's all about facilitation. We always tell people it's not about how you did in this game, because that's just a game, but the lessons learned from this could help you to really define your career for the rest of your life. So in this world, we focus on work a lot, a little bit of education, and continuing education. So the old concept where you finish university and that's the end of it, you go to work for the next, 50 years of your life, that's sort of over. The world's changing so quickly, you just have to learn and relearn, and so this part comes in. And then there are these things like the bank and what are your aspirations and so on. I just wanted to go into this because these are the job families, so these are the actual sort of stations that you can visit and play. In each of these stations, there are 3 levels, just from our perspective makes it simple to understand. And there are rules. I think from your perspective, you just need to understand there are rules. And part of it would be the educational level that you have attained. And part of it is the multiple intelligence, what you so-called naturally good at. Right? And you need to meet both criteria before you can sort of go to the next level. So we try to infuse real life principles into this game so that after the game itself becomes intuitive for them as well. What are the takeaways? We call it wit, grit, and fit. And there's a whole lot of research that we put in behind this. So Howard Gardner, I think, has spoken a lot about wit. And then together with that, he had a paper also on how wit and grit fit together and then how that relates to character and the greater good you can do in society. Angela Duckworth, there's a whole bunch of research out there, I won't go into it. And then finally, about fit, where can I shine, even after I know I've all this stuff? Where's the place that's best suited for me and my unique talents? And that's something that we invite people to explore at the end of this game. And at the end of it, we actually let the people do that round of debrief and evaluation and how do you feel about it. I think that's a very important point. And after that, what we also do is we encourage people to go on to the government-approved websites, and we have some materials for them to look into as well, based on all these research that you see here. So it doesn't just end with the game, the end of the game. But the end of the game is actually the start of a greater exploration. So what color is your parachute? It's one of the materials we use very, very sort of prominently. Understanding who you are, choose where you work, test taking as a tool. So all of this is sort of backed up by research, and then there are different points where people can enter depending on where they are. So different people will get different things out of this game. It's meant to be played and replayed. And then after the game, you could take an actual test, the Holland Code. That's something we use in Singapore by John Holland to sort of assess your interests and your match for particular jobs. So it's basically 6 alphabets. You get 3 alphabets after you finish the test, and then those 3 alphabets will be indicative as to where you are in this job world, and that forms the basis of an initial exploration. Right. So a little bit about the concept behind multiple intelligence. Starts with IQ. That's like way back in 1904, very long ago. And then Howard Gardner found that multiple intelligence is probably more relevant than just raw IQ itself, which is 2 out of the 8 sorts of intelligence, word and logic smart. So he came up with this theory. And then many people built on it, including Brenton Schroer, who mapped it to natural interests. And that's another test that you can take together with this whole game to find out, in game earlier you saw that you actually sort of tick off the boxes yourself. But out of game, you can do the actual assessment by Brenton Schroer to find out what your own multiple intelligence set is, and then how does that link to a potential career. Carol Dweck, Growth Mindset, Angela Duckworth, and her colleagues on Grit, Paul Tough, Performance Character, Howard Gardner, Beyond Grit and Grit, and the Good Project that I mentioned earlier. And there's just a lot of ongoing work as well, which I think we can continue to do that. So what are the key success factors in the job world, right? So we talk about career anchors. And we fit the 3 big pillars: multiple intelligence, performance, character, and then fit with environmental factors. It sort of maps out in different frameworks, including Edgar Schein's career anchors. Right, so this is just some of the research into it, what it takes to succeed. This is where we hope that people would be able to find that sweet spot. Right? If you manage to find where your multiple intelligences, your natural sort of abilities fit in with what you are naturally passionate about. Will I really stick it out for that 10,000 hours people say it takes to succeed? And then how do I find a place that best leverages that grit and that grit that I have and rewards those in that context? And that's the right company I should be working for. That's the sort of right setting and situation I should put myself in. Right? So that's, I think, what it takes to succeed. And the game steers people in that direction through the gameplay when you experience it for yourself. Like, you might go through a particular station, you might be earning a lot of money, but you find that you hate it, then hey, maybe that's not it for you. Right? Or conversely, you could be in a station that you are really not making a lot of progress, but you really enjoy it. Then you have to ask yourself, is this something I'm really passionate about, that I'm willing to put in the 10,000 hours to succeed? There's no right or wrong answers, but I think what this game provides, which the traditional career development workshops do not, is that it lets you explore and experience. Right? So it's not the master teacher approach, is they go in, figure it out, why do I like this, why do I hate this, and then how does it map back to my actual life. Right, so that's the way we have chosen to do this Edu-Larp, realistic world. It mirrors the actual academic world and the job context, but what I'm very careful to tell the sort of the government people, right, who are into this game as well, is that it should not be the exact replica, because then it doesn't allow people to express or to feel, to experiment. It doesn't allow people to experiment freely because they are still tied to themselves, right? Career play, there's NPC, interaction. So all the people at the different stations have very tightly written scripts. You have to say this thing before I will let you sell me the pen, right? For the people in the sales room, and so on. And I think the final point I wanted to make here is that facilitation is really the key to all of this, right? At the end of the day, it's how would the people respond to the different elements of the game. I'll just give one final example here. There was this 15-year-old boy. We played it in the context of a school. I'll just flash very quickly to this. And he had, this boy actually, he was, he went to the sales station basically, right? The checkpoint where he was supposed to sell something. And he was supposed to choose a customer. So we had this chart and he could point to one of 8 characters. So the NPC would then role play one of these 8, right? The first person he chose, this was like just the first 5 minutes of when the students went out to the working world, and he chose the most difficult customer. And it was in the script that the customer was supposed to be really mean and scream at him if necessary. And that happened. And I played the customer. And I felt so bad about it. And I basically said, I want to see your manager. Right? And he went off. And he got his manager back. I thought he was close to tears. But he eventually became the top performer in sales. He managed to show that resilience. He managed to come back. And it was such a positive experience for him. Right? So I believe he learned a lot from that. And that's really part of the journey as well. So yeah, well, with that, I'll just close and take questions at the end. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker will be Susan Weiner, talking about case studies as tabletop RPGs. Is you?
Yeah. All right. Hello, everyone. So, I am a LARPer and a LARP writer, and a lot of you may know me from that context, but in my real life, I'm a biology professor. And I teach a lot of pre-med, upper-level physiology. And for those of you who teach at the college level and even at the high school level, there's a lot of material. And figuring out how to balance interactive and memorable and really engaging with all of this, with getting through the material that you are required to get through so that your students get the boxes checked off for the tests for the MCAT that they need to study for and all of those things. This is a really hard balance, and this is, especially in the sciences and some of those, this is something we struggle with a lot. And one mechanism that a lot of people really like that strikes a balance on these is case studies. And so I'm talking about taking case studies and taking this tool that we already use a lot and bringing it into a somewhat more engaging and interactive variant. Case studies are great. They're active learning. We're getting students out doing things, engaging with things. They teach through stories. We all love stories, right? Everybody loves stories. We think about in stories. We tell about our lives in stories. And they increase student engagement. And they also allow us to focus on real details, real nitty-gritty details of material that we need our students to have exposure to. But the traditional case study design is interactive and engaged in a very sort of limited and focused way. You start with a story, and then the students get the story, they go do some research, they get what the information they need to understand the questions, And then they answer some questions, some of which are going to be basic research questions, and some of which are more complicated thought questions where they might need to make decisions. And then they may or may not get another piece of story and do this again. Now, I'm combining this with another setting that a lot of you are probably have some experience with, which is tabletop RPGs. So there's some similarity in what's happening in these two worlds, right? You have a setting, you have a story. But in tabletop RPGs, you've got a world that's moderated by a GM. In most tabletops, this is the style that I'm focusing on. There are some tabletops where that's not true. And players take on specific roles in this world. Now, there are some case studies already out there where players do this, where you take on specific roles. And then decisions are made by those players that impact the game world. And that's the really important part, is that when you're only writing down your answers and turning them in at the end, they don't have a real impact on the world that you're dealing with. And that's what I'm trying to bring in here. So that makes the diagram a little bit more complicated and harder to read in this light, so I apologize. These colors show up better on my screen. So we'll talk it through. So first, to make this work, there's some amount of outside prep. Now that's usually going to be the case for a lot of these, sort of often referred to as flipped classroom activities, where students do more of the, instead of I stand up here and I lecture like I am doing right now, the students do readings and watch video lectures beforehand. Then they answer questions online so that I know that they've gotten the idea, and that they also have a chance to ask me questions. And we use those questions that they've asked online I'll give a short lecture where we answer the questions, and so now they've read their background material, they're ready to move forward, I've answered whatever questions they had about the background material. And now we can, and so that's out of class readings, questions on the readings, short lecture based on the student questions, and then we're ready to get to the story. So the story can be anything that relates to what the class is working on. Is what's happened so far in this world. Now, the examples I'm going to be using are physiology, because that's what I teach, but it really doesn't matter. The one nice thing about physiology is when we're talking about case studies, we can often use medical cases. Most of my students want to go on to health careers. Some of them want to be want to go to med school, some of them want to go to dental school, some of them want to go to PA school, but that large majority of my students want to go down to medical careers. So if I hand them a case study where they're dealing with a sick patient, I've got their attention immediately. This is something they care about. So this is going to have a story with what's happened so far. It's information on the key points for research. For example, here's your patient presentation. Here are your symptoms and your findings, what you have so far. Now, this is going to include a lot of it, like, well, here's your blood pressure. Well, is that a normal blood pressure? You might have to look that up. Things like that. So, things that they're going to have to do some research on. Now, they do this work in groups. I like groups of 4 to 6. They're good. Those are good numbers, mostly 4 and 5. But there's a lot of flexibility there. And then within that, hey, you know what 4 or 5 sounds like to me? That sounds a lot like a D&D party. It's a really good size for a lot of tabletop RPG groups. So they take on roles within this. And in my class, again, most of these are pre-health students, so you might have the surgeon, and you might have the dietitian, and you might have the person's primary care physician, and you might have an oncologist. And those people will go then do research on whatever is particularly relevant to their specific role. So often early in the semester, if I do a lot of these, I'll mark out like, these are the things the surgeon should be researching. and here are all the specific roles. Later in the semester, once they're more used to this, they might pick what roles seem relevant to them in this case. And once they've done that research, they'll make some initial decisions. Now, in the case of treating a patient, this is often going to be things like, what tests do we need to run? Is there any treatment this patient needs urgently now before we get to the results of this treatment? Will this patient die if we don't stabilize them right now? That's more important than any possible test you could be running. And then they present those decisions to a GM or facilitator, who in this case is the professor. And then in response, they get the feedback from those decisions immediately. So, did you successfully stabilize your patient with the actions you took? What are the outcomes of the tests you ran? If you ran a scan, here's your actual, here is an image of what you found on this scan. And then using that gives them more information and gives them a little more story that they can then iterate, do more research, make further decisions until they reach their final outcome, which hopefully in my class is successfully, diagnosing and appropriately treating this patient. And then they will write up their results of their tests and their final outcome, and how all of this went. So that this allows them to engage with the world in a much more active way. Overall, this has been very successful in classes. Students rate, as you can see, over 88% of students in these classes rated these as either effective or very effective. 74% of the students said that the course using these case studies helped them to think independently about the subject matter more or much more than other courses. And just a few student comments that I really, that came from these questionnaires. The case studies, people are reading ahead. The case studies are extremely helpful in understanding the material better and making sense of body systems while connecting different ones together. I really liked the case studies that were part of the class because it helped me to go step by step to diagnose our patients through this iterative process. And of course, I felt like house. Which again, these are almost all pre-health students, so they really enjoy that aspect of it. There are some limitations to this system. It is very teacher time intensive. I prepare as much as possible the responses to the decisions I think students are going to make in advance so that I can just send them out. But I have never yet run one of these case studies, even one that I've run 3 or 4 times before, and not had at least some group ask me for something or decide to do something that no group had ever done before. So some amount of on-the-fly decision-making, just like in a tabletop game, sometimes the GM needs to respond to the participants deciding to go off in a direction they hadn't prepared for at all. That happens in the classroom as well. It also really, really only works with students that having done the preparation already. So I have not tried this in a lower level class, and I don't teach at the high school level. I think it could be done, but you would have to find a way to make sure that the students are doing the preparation, which can be a lot less consistent in lower level classes. I've done this with upper level undergrads and grad students. And I haven't done any direct effect testing on the actual effect on student learning. But overall, this can be a great way to encourage agency and engagement while still allowing a lot of very detailed focus on some of the fine-grained material that is necessary in upper level college courses. And thank you.
We've got time for some questions for discussion, and I would love if we could have a moderated discussion that involves all of our presenters and lets them have some dialogue as well. So with that in mind, I'm going to cancel my timer and open it up to questions.
Hi, Sam Anderson from UMass Amherst. The question is for Susan, but I think it can apply to all of you with regards to when you have to sort of get groups from within a larger set. How do you go about assembling that self-organization, assigning, mixing up groups over the course of a period of time, or keeping one to two? Like, I'm curious about how that worked out, particularly for you, but for all of you.
Sure. So I personally use a team-based learning approach, where there's a bunch of different pieces of this. This is a little bit of technical jargon. I recommend, there's a lot of good resources on this. But I create teams with there's a lot of research on how to get teams where you're maximizing the diversity of perspectives while still encouraging people to speak up. It includes, for example, not putting one woman in a team of men or one underrepresented minority in a team of white people. You want preferably a good mix there. It involves making sure that if you've got I try and balance GPAs and things like that. So I actually do a lot of work in figuring out these teams. There's a resource I highly recommend, which is CatMe. CatMe is wonderful. It not only allows you to make teams, but it also allows them to give each other feedback. I keep the same teams the whole semester, which I think for these ones where you're building sort of these roles, I actually find that to be really helpful because people get used to sort of figuring out what roles do we need, who likes playing what roles, and assigning those within the teams.
I didn't use it in this case, but I actually had a team building game that I designed, which is a trading card game where each of the students is asked to create a game design superhero character based on themselves with stats, and then I make them self-organize to create a balanced team. And so we have the first round, they all just roam around and match cards and make sure they have a balanced team, and then the second round is the trading round where the whole class evaluates the balance of each team, and then they make trades. So I, for a long time, was using all kinds of surveys and stuff, and I just said, screw it, I'm going to make a game, and it works better than pretty much anything. One thing I have found, what Lizzie talked about, you have to be really careful about temperament, because, especially in a situation like brainstorming, a group of introverts can sit for hours and say nothing to each other. So it helped me to kind of let them be self-aware and self-policed.
Is that published anyway?
No, but I can send you it's just how you condense cards and I can send you
I've heard from Magdalene specifically. I'm curious about the activities that the participants do once they are in a career. Specifically because, for example, if I have no experience being a plumber and I pick the plumbing track, what kind of task will you make me do?
So all the activities are chosen based on the skill sets that we think are needed, and then we compress them. Right? So it's a sort of two-step approach. So we talk to the professionals and we find out what are the key skill sets. So for example, in the coding station, right? It's all about logical thinking, computational thinking. So you need to think in a certain sort of way, a sequence. And we then use the basic a Scratch program. It's freely available online. And we say, okay, I'm going to teach you how to draw a square now. Right? So you take that thing and then I'll give you some instructions. You move this thing up 10 and then you turn 90 degrees, you do 10 steps, and then you turn 90 degrees, turn 10 and then 90 degrees, and then that's a square, right? So that's something that the facilitator will teach you, your boss, right? The coding world. Then we say, okay, so this is your list of tasks, right? Your next task is to draw a rectangle. So can you draw a rectangle now? right? So you need to know the difference between a square and a rectangle, which is like two sides are longer than the other two, and then how do you get there, right? So it's 10, 20, 10, 10, 20, 10, 20, right? So if you get that, you're good for round one. And then we say do a triangle, do two triangles on top of each other, that kind of stuff. So people who like this stuff, the basic computational thinking stuff, would then gravitate towards this station, and vice versa. And it's the same theory we apply throughout all the stations. So sales, what's important in sales, how do we break it down? So you don't have to be a coder or a salesperson, but you can't get the fundamentals of it.
Thank you.
Okay, I had a couple questions for Celia and Lizzie. First, I was just curious, because you were talking about your hashtag feminism LARPs, and I was wondering when you ran these, is that branding up front and part of the presentation? And then my second question was, you described running the Glitzy Nails LARP as a fail. Can you define failure? What makes something a failure?
Sure. Yeah, we do brand it as hashtag feminism up front. We show them like a slide of the book and talk a little bit about the design parameters. They're all LARPs that play in under an hour with simple, if any, props and prep made by designers from all over the world about the issue in contemporary feminism that was like meaningful to them right now. How to define failure in a LARP? That's harder. I mean, certainly one of the fails of Glitzy Nails was that we meant it to empower people from marginalized intersections, and instead they felt alienated. So that was a pretty big fail.
Yeah.
And the actual experience of the LARP, like watching them play it, they succeeded in playing it, and we didn't have a lot of time for debriefing that class session. So maybe you could talk a little more about.
Actually, I want to say
how
one
they
thing
found
that I
it.
think we can emphasize enough is that the running of the LARP was kind of a fail, but the rest of the exercise where they made their own hashtag feminism LARPs was not. So even if the gameplay is a fail, they can still make really interesting hashtag feminism games. So like they made amazing
They drew
games.
upon their experience doing that in their own.
So I gave them a copy of the PDF to look at. I said, I want you to make your own LARP that fits the hashtag feminism framework. And those were fantastic. So the nice thing is even if the gameplay wasn't as successful as one might hope, the outcome on the design side of the exercise was great.
Can I ask our other two presenters to answer that question about what failure states or examples of how your games maybe didn't work?
With the sort of facilitator role that I take on in these, generally, most of the issues I am able to just sort of step out of the thing and provide some external support and help and make these work. I think the biggest failure modes I've had have been dysfunctional teams, and I do try to resolve that, but that absolutely can happen. So it's not necessarily that I've had huge fails with the particular games that they're playing through, but that if a team is not dividing work well among themselves and not agreeing on things, that can be a real challenge.
But in your game, it's possible to have a misdiagnosis. You know, like you can
Yes.
actually have a correct or incorrect
Yes,
outcome.
but that's not a failure in terms of how things go. That's a teaching moment.
Right.
That's a chance to correct and learn from the situation.
We haven't had like failures yet per se in this game, and I think part of the reason is because we have those 5 minutes out of game modes where we sort of steer people back. But we had a few scary moments. We had one situation where the team evaluating the game tried to game it and so stress test it, right? So there was one person who refused to do anything for the whole like 25 minutes, 2 rounds of that. Right, and then we said, how many of you are not enjoying the game? And that person raised their hand and said, this is a horrible game. I'm doing nothing. And, but fortunately, through facilitation, we managed to swing it back. And we said, well, that's exactly how you expect it. If you in the real life. It was kind of a aha moment.
Nice.
I'm really grateful for the 5-minute thing. It was a bit mechanic, but it sort of worked for some in the wider picture as well.
Are there other hashtag feminism that you would recommend for the classroom beyond the two that you shared?
Yeah, tons. There are lots that have been played in different places. It really depends on it depends on the class. But yeah, there are a lot of games for them. I believe something to drink with that, sir. I was talking to somebody here, I feel, like at this conference, who had used it in a sociology classroom. Yes. Yeah. And many others. There's I'm trying to think, the Restrictions, which is a game about gender movement. It red genders and green genders was used in a devised theater class in Ireland. I have a whole list somewhere that I'd be happy to share.
You had a question earlier?
I was thinking about piggybacks off of the question about fails. I was very interested in Lizzie and Celia's like to brands of things a fail state where it's like, okay, 90% male classroom didn't want to have their nails painted. And what I was interested in was like, to what degree do you find fails useful, and to what degree might you like attempt to do something that fails multiple times, or is that sort of outside of your pedagogy, where you might say, okay, that failed, we're not going to use it again, or you're going to say, all right, we're just going to do this over here and let people grapple with the fact that this can be later.
That's a good question. I actually talked to one of the students that played the game who wanted to play it, and his frustration was actually around the fact that the person he was partnered with didn't know how to do these nails. So there was this like frustration around lack of competency, and that was one of the things I think that broke that game. So I feel like if they were being asked to do, as we gave them real nail polish, if we were asking them to do a manual dexterity task that they were more comfortable with, that might have overcome the sociological barrier of the game. But because it was also just this practical thing, I've never painted someone's nails before and I sucked at it, the kids who wanted to keep playing the game, it ruined the game for them. So I think that was kind of interesting to me because different people can have different levels of experience, but as everyone knows, a player can ruin a game for another player. That was kind of how that played itself out. So I feel like that might be the way to think about it. Is like, so the thing that's great about shout out to launch, is that it's sort of deliberately designed to fail, and the fail state is fun. And so that makes it kind of fail-proof. So any possible fail about games will be a win. That's my.
So do you think that, for example, the male might just be able to contact changing by having like super great or something like zero level dexterity?
Maybe, yeah, that's possible.
I'm not sure it would solve the opting out problem, though.
So that was also a problem, like opting out.
It wasn't actually a problem for the game, and like the game could still succeed. But I think, it felt like a personal failure for me because we had chosen this game to create a space for the students to play, and then we found out that we had actually created the opposite of that.
We were specifically thinking of these female and non-gender binary students, like because we wanted something that would sort of empower them or make them feel more empowered, and it did the exact opposite. That's what the fail was for me, like as a well-meaning, inclusive person, trying to do something inclusive and then completely backfire. So that's why we want to be a little more careful in the future, because my intentions just blew up in my face on that one.
Is it question all the way in the back?
So, with regards to the Singapore career path, did people come in, did any of those players come in with a conceived notion on what they knew they wanted to be, and then after the game was played, they said, no, you're this thing, but then they were like, no, I'm still the other thing, like your test is wrong. Did anybody do that, or how did that, what's like the majority and minority?
So when people come to play the game, they do not know what the stations are, right? And we do rotate the stations from time to time, depending on the group that we are organizing it for. And I think we are at great pains to tell people that you're not playing in the world of Singapore, right? We give it a different name. We say this is Singaland. So kind of similar to Singapore, but not identical. And I'm not even going to tell you which other parts that are not the same. You'll discover that. So it's really no front loading. You go in and all they are briefed on is this is the exam you're taking as a 12-year-old, right? And then after that, it's free play. And I think at the end of the game, we do emphasize to people that look, this is a game. You did well, great. You didn't do well, well, that's fine because you've got more learning points than the guy who did well probably. And then what's the next step for you in your real life? And then we found that approach usually works quite well. And it's actually at the core of LARPing, right? That you sort of disassociate yourself, your real self from your game persona. And then that helps you to immerse, learn, and then not get offended personally because you didn't do well in the game. So, yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up question, is that okay? I wasn't 100% clear. Do people, like you have those categories, do they know that this is the arts and entertainment station?
Yes, they do. So what we do is, let's say 4 corners of the group, right? So this is the gaming station, this is arts and entertainment, that's whatever, sales is something else, right? And then we don't tell you 3 layers. You have to discover that for yourself. But okay, this being Singapore, right? Everything's very structured and organized. So we do have a career guidance center, which in fact we do. So if you are at a loss and you look really like poor thing, we do tell you to go to the career guidance center. And after a while, people figure that that's the easiest way. And at the end of the game, we actually say, hey, there's all these resources that the government has in store for you, and these additional resources that we have, like the multiple intelligence stuff. So these are all the web links that you can go to. Yeah.
I want to know what some of the tricks you use when students start disconnecting. So let's say you have 7 or 8 students here, and this group is really into it, or they are confused and they need your guidance, and the other 3 or 2 start checking their phones, or they kind of drift away, just look to one of these things, and then you go and talk to them and say something. I mean, how do you sort of keep the troops gathered without being like a kind of a tech dictator?
This is a good question for each group.
So, in the upper level classes where I'm running this, honestly, once I've scaffolded it a little bit, I tend to have almost no problems with that. In lower level classes where I've done a little bit less intensive things, I do a lot of case studies in my lower level classes. I don't do this because I can't manage this with 48 sophomores in varying levels of preparation. But in those classes, I do, I find a lot of wandering around and asking questions of the students who aren't participating, just in the let's engage about this, does tend to help that students self-police their groups a lot, that they bring in the other people because they know that they need those other people and that that's part of what they're doing. And that simply just checking in with those students is usually enough to drive them back in. And when it isn't the peer evaluations that I do 3 times during the course of the class, they usually get low scores on the peer evaluations and then they start thinking about what they're doing.
Wow, I've never had a single student look at their cell phone when I was running any kind of game in class. Now that might be because I teach game design students. But they do look at their cell phones when I'm giving lectures and stuff. But when we're actually playing games, I've never had that experience. So maybe it's also a way to avoid that. Is to engage them in a half. It's fun. I mean, so.
I have 2 thoughts about that too. One is having people in smaller groups helps because then it's socially more rude to be looking at your phone. If you're rearranging the literal architecture of the classroom anyway, you can ask people to leave. I always ask people to leave their possessions in one corner. And when my brain is really working, I'm like, and leave your cell phones there too. And then the third answer is that as a facilitator, you can get people back into the game by acting in game at them. Sometimes, especially with new LARPers, they need somebody acting at them a little over enthusiastically to let them know that it's also okay to invest in communication.
On my part,
Oh, sorry.
okay, sorry. I think I echo what you were saying, that it's quite rare to have somebody disengaged, but I find that the 5 minute sort of breaks help because you then pull people back and you sort of give them a direction to aim towards, whether you want to direct people to various stations or aim for various things or guide them in a certain way, so that helps. And I think the other one is it's really just going out one-on-one and nudging them in a particular direction.
So Magdalene,
Yes.
particularly. So you talked about people thinking about so being in their at their workstation and thinking, do I enjoy doing this work and how much money am I getting out of it? It strikes me that it's a good way of teaching of students thinking about what values they have as well. So do they want to do something they really love and they're okay being low paid for it, or do they want to do something that actually they don't like because they love money and they want it? And I was wondering, is there any mechanic in the game that allows them to say if they earn money then they can buy stuff?
Yes.
So is that something that's in the game?
Yes. So I think the beauty of this game is that there are a lot of different components, and you can switch off or on some of these components depending on the group you're playing with. So in the very early days when I played this game, there was a huge element, lifestyle element. That was before it was predominantly a career design game. Right? A career design is just a means of earning money so that you can do all the lifestyle stuff, like buy a house, invest in the stock market, that sort of stuff, right? But in this iteration of the game, it's a little bit more on how you choose your career options and so on. We have actually in the last couple of rounds switched off the buying a house stuff, too much of that, right? Because we want people to focus on how do you go around and find something that you enjoy doing at a reasonable amount of money and so on. And there's another iteration of it that we were requested to plan. Put in a recession and
What do they know? Singapore.
So yeah, like at the end of round 2 or 3, like in the first few rounds, then we sort of make the economy boom, right? Every round is just like your wages go up and suddenly one station just closes down. So yeah, so that's another possible way of playing it. So it really depends on what the objective of that particular game is. Right? Is it for a more general audience and it's about values and lifestyle and so on? Because that in the initial days when we played this, it was really for people to reflect on you have one life, you live it well, what choices are you going to make? Right? So then it was a little bit more on the lifestyle part. Then this current part is a little bit more heavier on the career design part. So we sort of lowered the emphasis on one and then strengthened. For example, we didn't have 3 layers of careers in the first iteration, and now we're adding in different stations, and then we're going to do a mix and match, and then maybe we're going to have sessions, right?
So we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. Don't make me call on Sharon. I promise I will. Not dudes, you have a question?
Well, I actually have a question for Meg. What kind of assessments have you been able to do on the effectiveness of the program and trying to track your participants going forward?
So the first time we played this game was, let me try to count the dates. This person was 18 and she's like 34 now. So that's pretty long time. She found, so we haven't tracked it in a very academic way, right? Because that's not really some background that I come from. But we have anecdotal experience sharing that people have found it useful because it's brought out particular points for them. And interestingly, everybody gets a different takeaway. Yeah, so it's really where you are in that point in time. Like this person I'm speaking about, she didn't come from a very good academic background, and through the game she realized that hey, there are things that she does enjoy doing, and she doesn't need a super academic background. Today she works as a hospice care worker, and she said that has been one of the things that has been helpful for her. So I was very encouraged when I heard that. The most recent iteration of the game is far too new for any sort of findings.
I just have a question for my friends. Do you have a customizable template for this game? Is this something that can eventually be given out to other institutions that they can customize themselves? If I want
That's really cool. That's exactly why I'm here.
Yeah.
Back on the game and
Like I want to take this to our career center and Central Bay John and say we should be doing this. So like what can I give them?
okay, well,
Should they call you?
yes, yes, they should. So I think it's really exciting. When I started writing up this sort of second iteration of the game, it was like I said earlier, ready for that one custom purpose. The regional CEO of that company was coming down and they wanted something special, and we talked about it and we said, okay, we can do this. And I think the level of interest that we've gotten is, to be honest, a lot more than I expected. The honest answers, I really love my job because my day job, right? Because I think it's that finding that sweet spot with grit and fit. And I'm really, really excited about sharing this. So I have some stuff written up. I'm happy to share some of the frameworks and then to explore how we can work with your different career centers as well.
That's awesome. Okay, sure. Good. Last question.
So this is particularly for Susan, but I think everyone can speak on this. Are there specific things or specific types of things you think are hard or not good to teach using this sort of procedural strategy stuff?
So I think I have applied this to a few different biology classes. The one I talked about the most was a medicine focused one. I think that the way I'm doing it, you could apply to almost anything because almost everything has technicalities to research and important decisions to make that might have an effect on something that would change something else that you could make more important decisions about. Like, I think that it's hard to come up with a subject. I'd love to hear if someone thinks they have one that you couldn't have some of that sort of applied type of question on if you want to talk about applications, and bringing things to applications people care about is a really great way of getting them to focus and think about these things. And part of how I came to this was that I was having a lot, like I love all of the edu-larp stuff, and I couldn't figure out how to really make it work in my world because of the amount of detail I'm trying to work with and the sorts of things I've done a little bit of edu-larp in some cases, harder to get that in. And this is sort of the compromise I got to, I think, because of that. Now, in a setting where, I think there are settings where it's harder to do this. You couldn't do this in a giant classroom. You couldn't do this in a group of students where you just can't get them to prepare outside of class. But with subjects, I don't think so.
We're out of time. So thank you for your question.